Stephen Adams from Optimum Strategic Communications. We help life science companies from seed stage onwards all the way through to raise a higher profile amongst the media and amongst investors. And we also work with investors such as Nova Holdings, M Ventures, Medici, Sofinova Partners. Sadly not with Lilly, but there we go. We can always hope for more. But let's kick off, if we can. Obviously, my panel members don't need any introduction. So this panel is on disruptive therapeutic discovery platform technologies, big data sets and better means of integrating them have obviously been changing the way that drugs are discovered and developed for many years now. Long before AI became a buzzword, but clearly AI is supercharging things. But let's start at basics and talk about how these technologies are being used right now, the main ways that they are used and can be used. And Nicole, if I can ask you to kick off, please.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. So I think there's probably maybe six parts of the drug development value chain where AI can really make an impact. The first is in target identification, so really understanding the basic omics, the DNA, as we were talking about earlier, target disease association. Secondly, in lead generation, so what are the molecules that you would want to bind to those targets? How are you going to design them? Thirdly, optimizing those leads, so how do you refine them in terms of their toxicity, their developability, and so on. The fourth area is in preclinical development, so building digital twins, for example, to understand how they'll work. Next, in clinical development, so refining drug design, trial design, helping to identify the right patients. But also you can use AI for writing regulatory submissions, and that can really accelerate that stage of the process. But then finally, actually, thinking about the data. So data underpins all of AI. Everybody's always talking about AI, but in fact the data is at least as important. There's very much a rubbish in, rubbish out problem, but also being able to actually access your data. So the way that you structure your data and the infrastructure and the way that agents have changed the way that you can normalize that data and accelerate the way that you do your AI, I think has really made a difference. So if you're just looking through the value chain, there's various different steps which are more effective. And I think those earlier steps, maybe there's been more focus. The target identification and lead optimization, there's been massive investment in the companies and the activities focused in those areas rather than the maybe more hairy clinical trial design, and regulatory steps, which are maybe still a bit harder to address.
Okay, thanks very much. Adita and Alfred, would you like to add anything to that very comprehensive summary?
Yeah, I think it was a very nice summary, basically outlining all the steps where the technologies could be useful. I cannot agree more, and to emphasize, of course, the early development. Of course, this is where our case study also shows the value. Why is it important, to use the technology and data integration before we go too far and spend too much money on different clinical trials and development. But I would also maybe add, how in general AI tools probably and other technologies can help us with, data interpretation as such. When we have so much data analysis results coming out as well, how do we make sense of what we already got? Not only like one analysis, but also integrating all the different analysis across different studies. What kind of information we can gather from that as well. And also after clinical trials are done, what can we learn, to make this better the next time as well and spend less money? How, go back a little bit from our molecule design to the end of a clinical trials, can we actually match? Because I believe in, and from experience, I know, having worked also previously at Novo Nordisk for several years, that in big pharma, these areas might be very too far from each other. There is one group doing early drug discovery and completely different people and different country even doing the clinical trials and analyzing those. So kind of connecting the dots afterwards and making some kind of reasoning or basically conclusions how to move forward the next time as well.
Okay, Alfred.
And yeah, I think those are quite comprehensive. I think the only thing I would add is I feel that AI has also changed the way we tap into existing information. I think in the past, like when you look for something, you just go on PubMed, you look for a paper sort of thing, and then you have to read every abstract. You have to understand what is relevant. Whereas I think these days, with the advent of how quickly AI search for information, people don't just tap into literature anymore. You can tap into patent documents, and anybody who has read patent knows that it's hard work. But what AI can do is that really succinctly summarize that so that you don't waste time discovering something that is not in literature but is in patent, and I think that source of information has become more and more important.
Okay, fantastic. I'm sure everybody in this room is now using AI in that capacity. It saves huge amounts of time. If we think about the way these technologies are impacting particularly drug discovery and development now, if we think all the way through the chain, where do you think it's having the biggest impact today in 2026? And Alfred, if I can kick off with you.
I think the biggest impact is definitely in what Nicole was saying, like lead discovery and engineering. I think there's a lot of effort into building those tools, very different tools that has made different assumptions, different algorithms. And I think the idea is that this has come into fruition because multiple companies and multiple platforms have shown that we are able to shrink a 3 or 4 discovery engineering time into like a year, launch a drug. And I think there is definitely improvement in the speed and the efficiency of making drugs that are good and specific, but not whether it is good enough as a drug. And I think definitely it's solving the problem at the beginning of the cycle, but not solving the problem at the end just yet. So we are launching a lot of clinical drugs, I think, but whether that materializes or not, I think, is something that we still don't know. Okay.
Adita, your views, would you agree with Alfred? Or?
Maybe I would like to agree and disagree a little bit. So I believe this is where it is right now, definitely where a lot of focus is, but where I believe there is a lot of value is actually getting back to the early discovery stage and, before designing the molecule and then putting a lot of money into testing it later in the labs, actually understanding what's happening in the disease on the different biological layers, how are they connecting together and what's the impact. So I believe there is a lot of value in this very early understanding and making sense out of the data that we have, because now having a lot of data is not the problem anymore, but kind of really having ability to understand that data before moving forward with new molecules, kind of know more insights and more information on maybe it's not the right molecule to go forward with, and maybe it's worth investing more in the very early stage before we continue.
So you think it's having an impact right now on our fundamental understanding of the biology of a particular disease?
I think it's also changed the way science is done, to be honest. I think, in the past, the way, I'm just taking antibody as an example because it's a common drug and I work with a lot of antibodies. In the past, animal immunization is always the first step that people are using, but you see a reduction in that. And now what is happening is that people are doing like variant generation and variant screening in silico. And gone are those days where people make huge, not gone, but reduction in those days where people make huge variants of like millions, hundreds of millions and billions. And now everybody just want to narrow down, based on what you can do in silico. Save money and save time on that. So I think it doesn't just change the way we handle data, like what Anita said, but also change the way actually how more and more people are doing science and how CRO actually behaves as well in the market.
Okay. Generally, the theme seems to be that it's having the biggest impact at the earliest stages of drug development, discovery even and development. Would you agree, Nicole?
I think that's where all the investment has been.
Right.
And I think that's partly actually because to an extent it's under the control of the organisations, the academic organisations or growing commercial organisations who are focused in that area, and it's where VC has really seen opportunity and that they've looked at that. Actually, I think in terms of the impact, I think there's a lot of opportunity to invest later in the value chain, for example, in building digital twins of clinical trials. But of course, that's not exactly under the control of academic scientists or venture capitalists. That's also to do with the interaction of the regulatory authorities. And for them to actually accept digital twins of clinical trials and change the the way that they allow that data to be submitted and the requirements that they have for clinical trials. So I think pushing in that direction, and the MHRA obviously is talking about that, the FDA is talking about that, but I think there's quite an untapped potential for AI later on in the value chain. And it's very sensible that all of that investment has happened at the beginning of the value chain in the kind of basic understanding, modelling and refining molecules. But I see actually potentially more benefit to come in future from later on in the value chain, either modelling trials or providing digital twins to reduce the number of participants in trials required, for example, more ethical clinical trials where you don't need to have placebo controls and so on.
Okay. Just going slightly off script from our questions, but the first speaker of the day talked about how, we're having in silico, for instance, is having a lot of success at these earlier stages, and expressed some skepticism about these tools having a bigger impact when we get into human studies, frankly. And will we get to the stage and it all looks great, but then they will fall over then? Got any views on that? I know it's a bit of a punt, we can't really say at the moment, but do you think it'll translate through to actually successful drugs, or is it most suitable to having a really big impact at the start of the value chain?
I would say it's easier at the beginning of the value chain because you're addressing a simpler problem.
Right.
If you're trying to identify a target, then you're looking at the DNA, the protein sequence, understanding the folding, understanding the target site, and there's only a certain number of variables that you're trying to address. If you're looking at a human in a tissue, you've got multiple cell types, multiple interactions, many more different things that can be addressed, and therefore the complexity is orders of magnitude greater. In due course, one would hope that you could model all of those things, but that's a 10-15 year problem. That's not, there's going to take time. So I think as articulated for today, it's true, but I would hope in future we could get there with the later phases. I don't know what you think.
I think that's definitely true, because the start bit is where, as scientists, it's the bit we can control.
Yeah.
It's the bit we can verify, we can test again, and we tell ourselves, we believe in it now, and we can control. Whereas clinical trial is not something, like you said, even if you stratify a patient population of the same disease, same mutation, they have different pharmacokinetics, and they will have different receptor expression, they will have different, way of expelling a drug, and all this affects clinical trial efficacy. I read somewhere, I think, I cannot remember the source, so take it with a pinch of salt, and they said AI designed drug has a phase 1 clinical trial success of 80 to 90% compared to traditional drug, which only had 40%. So this is more than half. But the problem with phase 1 is that it's just looking at tolerability. And this is exactly what in silico does, because in silico can tell you how well a drug binds, what else is dangerous, what has a cross-reactivity profile, and whether it's safe. And this is exactly the data it has told us now, that phase 1 is good, but what about phase 2? And at the moment, there are very few drugs that are actually in phase 2 and phase 3. I think in silico probably had a few that Katie had brought up in silico medicine, such a huge profile, they had, I think, a few drugs in phase 2. And I think the world is now looking on, I think the only phase 3 drug that I know is by this company called, I think, Generate Bio, that is in phase 3. And if that gets approved, that will become the first AI designed drug, that actually passed. And I think once that has been determined, I think our impression of the field, I think, will change accordingly as well. Yeah. So I think there's a lot resting on how that drug behaves now in phase 3.
Okay, fantastic. We've already kind of touched on this subject in that we expect in the future these tools to have more impact later in the value chain. But if we are doing a little bit of future gazing, not too much, but a little bit, and we look at, say, the next 10 years, where are these tools going to be having the biggest impact come sort of 2035 or 2036? And who wants to take that first?
Yeah, it's of course difficult to predict because it's changing, day to day, and it all depends as well on what data do we give, especially in biological sense, right? Because it's not the same as just training an AI algorithm for text writing. It's a much more complex algorithms that we have so that we later have data that makes sense of it. I believe that the field should probably move more from just predicting the outcome and more into really having a real snapshot, or how we would say, of all system layers of a full system biology, what is actually happening to the human body or any organism in a given moment between different biological layers, how are they connected, if, for example, have a disease and healthy individuals, or if we have a state of drug entering the body, if we have a not just predicted outcome, but actually what is happening from all the data we collect, we would have this nice view of a multi-layer biological connection showing how our organism is working in that case. I would see it going it maybe somewhere there with all the technology available for data analysis, integration, and data standardization, and so on.
Okay. Nicole, would you like to add anything? Or have you...
No.
Okay.
I don't quite know. I mean, I want it to be of benefit, and I want everything that we claim AI could help solve, will help solve. But I think one of the things is also, I think I can see in 10 or 15 years' time, our dependence on AI will not go away now that we know how much easier it makes life. And I really like that analogy that Katie gave. It's like email. You cannot live without email anymore. And this is the same as AI. It has permeated all range of our life. There's every tool, whatever you want to do, there is. And in terms of biological design as well, there's more and more companies who are actually repackaging AI tools, into like a chat interface. So that everybody can use it, whether you're a computer scientist, whether you're an AI engineer, it doesn't matter. The tool could speak in English. It's a nice platform, so everybody could tap into it. And I think the launch of this sort of technology means that it will continue to stay. And I think it's a question of whether how we improve all this algorithm that we know at the moment, and how we sort of change the tools. So I think data we'll have more data in 10 or 15 years. At the moment, we only have the data from the last maybe like 40 or 50 years that we can tap into. I think as more data come through, whether from clinical trial or drug design or from biology, as what Adita was saying, we will have more data. And I think all the models now will build increasingly on that to change things. Yeah.
Okay. Nicole, you talked about underinvestment in various areas of the value chain. Not future-gazing, but thinking now or in the near future. Are there any particular, or is there one particular area of the value chain you really think is underinvested in terms of this technology?
So I think there's two areas that I would highlight. Actually, I would build on what Adita and Alfred are talking about in terms of data. Because everybody talks about AI, whether it's the front pages of the newspaper or the kind of the title of the conference sessions, AI is the buzzword, but actually I think it's all about data, because at the end of the day, AI requires data, AI builds on data, and the quality and the integration of that data is the thing which determines whether it works or not. And I think that over the last 2 years, the way that agents have been developed has actually really changed the way that that data can be used, but also how you can decide which data you need. So we assume that over the next few years, data is going to be generated, but the openness of data, access to that data, so a lot of data is siloed within pharma companies. It's not really shared, despite some efforts at pre-competitive partnerships. So I think that the way that data is shared and the way that it is decided which data to generate, and then how that data is made open, will really decide how fast or slow different parts of the industry are able to progress. The second area is, as I think I was hinting at before, where everybody's talking about target identification and lead optimization, and there isn't, because of the regulatory barriers, maybe so much effort and focus and investment on clinical trials transformation and the regulatory activities and digital twins of clinical trials. And I hope that there will be a lot more investment, because frankly there's not very much point in us developing lots of leads and then the later parts of the pipeline, if you like, being very much smaller, and then we're not going to get products to patients, which I think is why we're all here, any faster than unless you are able to apply AI through the whole value chain.
There's a danger, isn't there, of simply shunting the bottleneck down the road. Exactly. Building a dual carriageway another 20 miles, but then...
Brilliant way of explaining, yes.
Okay. Look, we've got a couple of minutes left, and I'll open it to the floor. But just one other additional question. Okay, so these tools are going to make AI drug discovery and development quicker and cheaper. Does that mean drugs are going to become cheaper? New drugs are going to become cheaper in the future? There's silence for you.
That's the dream.
I think that it should
Yeah.
do.
You think it
I think
should?
we've kind of hopefully got to peak complexity if you look at where we were or where we have been and the regulatory complexity and bureaucracy that has been loaded on. I think these tools, the acceptance by the authorities that actually AI is a useful tool, you're now able to use AI and they're actually welcoming the use of AI, they're even using it themselves, should help reduce costs and the enormous amount of money that's spent in early discovery and the number of drugs which enter the pipeline and then you can't progress. It should improve.
Yeah.
When that will happen, Alfred has an idea.
No, it's just a funny thing because we discussed this with other people in the field as well, and it's always funny that there's a lot of investment in the early stage of drug discovery, but actually in the grand scheme of things, that is the least expensive bit. Because the most expensive bit is when you have to manufacture them, you spend tens and 20 million sometimes when things fail, and then the clinical trial is the bit that is going to take up the largest bulk of money and the longest time. But I think the problem with I think one of the challenges with AI drug development is like, sometimes people want to invest in what investors see as sexy, and there's a quick return to investment. And those sort of headlines where we made this new drug, we have this new target, sounds a lot more impactful than saying we managed to solve a manufacturing problem, which sounds boring and less important,
But it could have a huge impact.
It does, because that is where the cost is the highest, and also that is the part where you need to manufacture drugs that are clean in the correct formula that is stable to go into patients. But that is the area where, because the return to investment is slow, you don't see the impact so quickly, the investment is slower. And likewise, with pharmacovigilance, it's very long term. You need to get patient data, you have to analyze them, track certain patients' progression for a few years, and you don't see that return until 5-10 years later, and therefore the investment is low. So I think that there is a need to change that perception a little bit, to understand yes, it's good here, but this is actually, compared to the whole drug development pathway, that is really just the smallest percentage.
Okay.
And we are talking about cost here, but what you are mentioning is also the timeline, right? What we want to, so how fast the drug is actually from target reaching the market, which is related to cost as well, but also can be crucial in some of the diseases and areas as well.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left. If I can open it to the floor, any questions, please? Yes, gentleman down in the middle.
Peter Feldman from Queen's House Consulting. You've two very interesting examples of companies which have managed to develop a competitive edge in your respective areas. I wonder if you can comment on the pressures to commercialize what you've already developed and validated against the pressures to maintain that competitive edge with exponential growth in computing capacity.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. So we are kind of in between, where we used expert knowledge and our scientists a lot into giving biological interpretation, doing the analysis, but then moved towards the platform and automation. It still has human impact, so that we are not fully dependent on technology and just automated everything. But definitely the plan is to move forward, that there is less human interaction and everything is more automated in a way. But the thing is that everything we did so far, where it costed us more labor in terms of scientists really looking into data and analyzing, this is what we learned from and now can train basically our platform, our tools to do it in an automatic way. So we gathered information to make the platform better and faster and so on. So it's still a balance, and we have to find a good way to balance it. And we are still growing, basically, yeah. But definitely moving where the area is moving towards the automation part.
I think for us, we have accepted that we cannot solve every problem, and we have decided to choose a niche that we think we are good at, what our team is good at, and be really good at doing that. So an example is a lot of small molecules company come to us and say could you design? And we have been tempted to start, like chemi-informatics as well, starting to look into designing chemical structures. And then we realized to do that, to build our own data set, to start the machine learning model training, it's just a huge investment, and that's just not where the market is saturated with other AI companies who could do this. So we decided to stay in our lane, I suppose, in a good way to say it. We specialize and we continue to do what we are good at, and we develop that platform. And we partner a lot actually with other companies with complementary platform. Like recently, I spoke to somebody else who has their own immunogenicity prediction platform. And I think that's great for us because, we take everything all the way to lead generation. If they can do the immunization, the immunogenicity optimization, it's a win-win situation for everyone. So we try not to see everyone as a competitor, but to see where can we find complementary niches that we can work together. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I think we're out of time. Oh, good. Oh, that's fitting, isn't it? So.
So it is real.
Was it studio?
AI participant is real.
Talking about me in this panel.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I have a question about your timeline expectations. You mentioned that modeling the complexity of human tissues and cell interactions is a 10 to 15-year problem. How does this timeline impact your current valuation and investment strategy? And what milestones should investors expect in the interim?
I'm personally going to pass here, but I'll hand it over to my panel.
I'm not sure what to say.
Maybe I'll go back to the point that you were just talking about around focus. I think investors will want to see particular milestones delivered. And actually, if you're really clear about what those milestones are going to be, and you make sure that you do stay in your lane, and you're very clear which activities you're going to focus on, then you're more likely to satisfy your investors and make reasonable progress through that 10 to 15-year timeline.
Yeah, I think reasonable investors is a good term there. Yeah.
Okay, on that note, we'll finish. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.